Responses to this week's Bill Nye versus Ken Ham debate have been so numerous that if you were to sit down and watch them all in one sitting, they would easily last longer than the running time of the actual debate, which is impressive because that debate was long. I have never allowed redundancy or superfluity to stand in my way before, so here's what I thought of the debate. And actually, a few of the ideas I'm going to talk about in this video, you can hear me express in a slightly different way in the pre- and post-debate roundtable that I participated in the night of the Nye versus Ham debate. Thanks to Live Life 8072 and the gang from the Skeptic Fence Show. I was privileged to participate in the show along with Dark Matter 2525, and Dr. Robert Price was there for a little bit before technical difficulties unfortunately kept him from participating in most of the discussion. But it was a great time, a lot of fun, really smart, intelligent discussion both before and after the Bill Nye versus Ken Ham debate. And there's a link to it in the description box, and I'll throw one up on an on-screen annotation as well. So go check out that video. The major impression I was left with by that debate is that Ken Ham doesn't really know what science is. And I know for anyone who's familiar with Ken Ham or Answers in Genesis or creationism, intelligent design in general, that's not really newsworthy. You kind of know that if you know about those concepts and you know about these people. But it was on just brilliant, undeniable, crystal clear display during that debate. Ken Ham, despite his protests to the contrary, has no idea what science is. He calls what he does science, but then he says that he openly admits that he bases everything he believes on the authority of the Bible. He starts with the Bible, and then he works out from there. And that, whether Ken knows it or not, admits it or not, is not scientific. It is unscientific to do that. As soon as you do that, you have given up science. What you're doing, whatever it is, whatever you call it, it is not science. And it seems to be the only thing that Ken Ham knows how to do. I give him credit for being open and upfront about the fact that he is basing his entire worldview and all of his conclusions on the Bible. Because some apologists, some evangelists, Christians, theists, try to be a little more slippery about that. But not Ken Ham. He comes right out and says, I'm basing this all on the authority of the Bible. So good for him for being honest. Unfortunately, whatever credit he gains for that honesty has to be immediately withdrawn because he still insists that what he does is science, and it ain't. There's something else that Ham did during the debate, and I wanted to mention it here, and I mentioned this also in the Skeptic Fence post-debate show, and it's something that apologists and creationists do a lot. It's something that presuppositionalists in particular do as a basic element of the presuppositional argument. And Ken Ham does it as well when he gets into this issue of, well, you can't equate historical science, as he calls it, with observational science, because when you're dealing with something that happened in the past, you weren't there. You can't know for sure what happened. What he does, and what creationists, apologists often do, is he describes an actual philosophical problem. The problem, for instance, of learning what happened in the past, of gaining information and trying to understand and have reliable knowledge about an event that is not directly accessible to us. An event that happened in the past, something for which there is only evidence that we can examine and infer conclusions from. That's a legitimate problem. There is an unavoidable, inescapable uncertainty to everything that we experience, everything we think we know, every conclusion we draw. There is always going to be uncertainty. And the further removed we are from the thing we're studying, the more that uncertainty is going to be there. The less we will be able to close that gap. There will always be some uncertainty. And that is just a part of the human condition. And one of the reasons for that, one of the unavoidable reasons for that, is that we are at the mercy of our senses and our brains. We have these tools, these incredible, just phenomenal tools that enable us to gather information about the world outside of our minds And they're amazing, but they're imperfect. We can't always trust them. We can trust them most of the time, which is substantiated by the fact that we are able to trust them enough to live, to survive. We can corroborate with other people that we have the thing we are seeing is actually there. The noise we heard actually happened. Things like this. But they're not perfect, and nor is our interpretation of the data that our senses are bringing into us. And this is a problem that every person faces, and you can't get around it. And it's one of the fundamental reasons why we will just always have to live with a certain amount of uncertainty, and why it's so important to have evidence for things, and to have good solid arguments, good solid evidence, good reasons for believing the things we believe. Because we will never know for sure. We can come to a near certainty. We can make reasonable conclusions. We can overcome reasonable doubt, but we can never have absolute certainty. But what Ken Ham does is to describe that problem basically in an accurate way, but then invent some reason why it doesn't apply to him. He'll say, well, you can't say that life arose naturally by some chemical process 4 billion years ago because you weren't there. You don't know that that's what happened. The only way you could know if that's what happened is if someone who knew everything was there and saw it happen, and then he told you what happened. And that's the little escape hatch that Ken Ham invents for himself, because he claims that the guy who knows everything and saw it happen is God, and that God is telling him what happened through the Bible and through other various means of revelation. He's trying to exempt himself from this inescapable philosophical problem, and it just doesn't work. If you feel you're receiving a revelation directly from God, we could even leave the Bible totally out of it. If you believe that God is directly revealing some important thing to you, like in your heart, you have to trust that information, that revelation, whatever you want to call it, is coming to you from God, and it's not you just making some shit up, or it's not some other source revealing things to you. So someone else hasn't hijacked the hotline to your brain, or however that's supposed to work. There are so many assumptions you have to make, and you will always be at the mercy of the same problem that all of us face. Ham and other creationists and other apologists disingenuously or naively, maybe to give them a little more credit, try to exempt themselves from this problem, but there is just no getting around it. So that was Ken Ham's performance. Not unexpected, nothing new from him, nothing that anyone familiar with Ken Ham and his act haven't heard before in some form or another. Bill Nye, on the other hand, did fantastic. He did such a good job. What a wonderful ambassador for science. He was genial, he was likable, he was easygoing. The debate had a very cordial tone to it, but he held Ken Ham's feet to the fire. He did not let him get away with things. He constantly returned to questions, to asking for evidence, to asking for predictions from Ham's creationist theory, which he never got. And he just did an amazing job. And he had these cold-hearted, like cold-blooded, silent death stares that he would shoot at Ken Ham when Ham was answering a question and he was going into some creationist horseshit, and Bill Nye would just stand there behind his lectern a few feet away and just give this totally stone-faced, serious stare right at Ken Ham. And judging purely by his facial expression, it seemed like Bill Nye was communicating that he was not amused, he was not charmed, and he had a great deal of contempt for not necessarily Ken Ham as a person, but for what Ken Ham was doing. And well, he should. Well, we all should. Anybody who cares about what is true should have contempt for what Ken Ham is doing, because what he is doing is an obscene, vulgar mockery of science in the name of science, and that is, science is the last thing that is. There is one thing that Bill Nye said right at the end, and when he was getting into his closing remarks, that I personally would have said differently. I will be just that presumptuous. The question being considered was not the question for the whole night, but just the question for this particular segment, was, is there a place in science for God? And Nye gave a very good answer, but not the answer I would have given. One of the threads that Ham pulled on repeatedly during the debate was this idea that naturalism, that scientific naturalism is in some way just another form of religion, that it requires faith just the same as Christianity does. And this is a common argument. The guy who wrote the book that I'm currently reviewing in my An Atheist Reads series, The Reason for God, Timothy Keller, the author of that book, makes a similar argument. He basically says, yeah, well, whether you're a religious person or you're a skeptic of religion, it's all religion. And that's a horseshit argument. There are important differences between a scientifically derived conclusion and a conclusion based on religious faith. So I think it would have been nice if Nye, in responding to that question of is there room for God in science, if he would have said something like, yes, there is absolutely room for God in science, provided you can show evidence that God is real. You can't just make up God or claim that God is there without any substantiation of the claim and then say, why isn't there room for God in science? In that case, without evidence, there's just as much room for God in science as there is for the Loch Ness Monster in science, or leprechauns, or pixies. These non-existent things for which there is no evidence, in which we have no reason to believe. There's no place for them in science until there is evidence substantiating their existence, just as there is no place for God in science until there is evidence substantiating his existence. If there could be evidence compelling us to believe that God was real, absolutely there's a place for God in science. So if you want there to be a place for God in science, creationist folks, show the evidence. Show the evidence. Give people who don't believe in God a reason, a real compelling reason to believe that God is a real thing and not a superstition. That's all you need. If Bill or if Ken Ham has a problem with naturalism, if he thinks that naturalism is a religion, I've got good news for him. Unlike his religion, naturalism is falsifiable. All you need to do to disprove naturalism is show me good evidence of a supernatural cause for an event. I won't be a naturalist anymore. It's just that easy. But I've never seen that evidence. I've never seen anyone show me that such a cause has ever taken place. And that's not conclusive, but it's, to me, very suggestive.